Hello everybody, welcome back to my book vlog. Today we're going to discuss a music memoir. We're going to discuss Jake Shears' Boys Keep Swinging. Now, Jake Shears, you all know, right, is one of the founding members and vocalists for Scissor Sisters. And this is a particular interest to me because I was a huge fan of the Scissor Sisters. And I found Jake Shears an extraordinary, charismatic frontman. And so I was really keen to read his memoir, particularly as a lot of that would, I hoped at the time, would be focused around New York in the early 90s, mid 90s. And I just find that a really fascinating era. And I really wanted to hear the perspectives of growing up as a gay man in the New York scene at that time. And it really delivers. Boys Keep Swinging is a superbly exciting and dynamic memoir. Jake really lets it all out, and he's extremely open about his life, his experiences, both as a gay man and also as trying to make it as a singer in what was a very competitive and tricky environment. But there's also something very special about this book in the way that Jake talks about his early childhood years and the challenges that he had growing up gay in a household which wasn't particularly supportive of him being gay, and certainly was also, there was the big shadow of the misunderstanding around the AIDS virus and how that impacted his own opinion of being gay and the opinion of those around him and fears for him about being gay. So Boys Keep Swinging is an absolutely fantastic memoir. So we follow Jake really from his early years growing up in sort of Arizona and the West Coast as a young boy fascinated by He-Man dolls and someone who was really keen to look different and be different. You can sense from a very early age that Jake was an exhibitionist and an extrovert, and even though he experienced really tough conditions and bullying at school for being so different, he persevered because he really identified with himself as someone who was being extrovert and exhibitionist. And that's a really fascinating theme, especially when some of the bullying gets quite hard to bear witness to. That we then follow Jake as he begins to find himself a corner of the world where he feels he belongs, first in Seattle and then later on in New York. And he is really open about the dazzling scene that he finds in New York, all the clubs, his first start as a go-go dancer and as a stripper for the gay bars in town, and how he really found the kick from being on stage and having people respond to him emotionally, and how he saw that really fed his ego. And then mixed with his love of music, particularly David Bowie, he found that if he could make himself a frontman for a band, this would really fulfill the yearnings in him to be himself, to be Jake Shears, because Jake isn't his real name. His real name is Jason. And so he sort of found this persona, this version of himself that he managed to inhabit and found real freedom from being within. There's also, particularly with Jake's life, there are moments of real tragedy and heartfelt sadness, particularly around his friendship with Mary, a heavily obese woman who he found a real sense of kinship with when he was in Seattle, and that was a friendship that lasted all of Mary's life. But there's an interesting point with this book, which I kind of wanted to focus, is it stops just as Jake and Scissor Sisters go into the recording studio to record Ta-Da, which was their second album, the follow-up to their hugely successful debut album, which is a must listen to if you haven't listened to and haven't got the Scissor Sisters debut album. It's phenomenal. And that's an odd place to stop, because obviously that was many years ago. Scissor Sisters had another couple of albums after Ta-Da. But also, just at the end of this book, Jake begins to open up about finding true love with his husband. And he also just begins to open up about factions and fractures and arguments within Scissor Sisters, and how the competing personalities made it very difficult, and the pressure on him as a singer-songwriter to deliver the goods was creating both pressures and jealousies within the band. And then the book kind of stops, which is interesting because where we are now in 2018, Jake is no longer with the man he describes as the love of his life at the end of the book. And we know after Ta-Da, Scissor Sisters not only have broken up, but they had a very difficult period during that time where Ta-Da was not well critically received, and Jake obviously had a lot of problems and pressures with sort of dealing with how he can produce another follow-up successful album. And so it's an odd place to stop, because I kind of expected Boys Keep Swinging to go almost all the way up to Scissor Sisters splitting. So I wonder whether there's a sequel in the works. And if there is, I really hope that is the case, because Jake's point of view and his way of expression is just so absorbing. This is a wonderful book that you just fly through, and even though it's quite chunky, you really want more at the end of it, because Jake is such a fantastic storyteller, and because he's always able to emotionally excavate himself and talk about how he's feeling in certain situations and bring to life whether experiences such as the great big drag balls that he goes to, or David Bowie turning up at his gig and how he sort of clumsily reacted to that. You really are there in the moment. And so I'm kind of wondering if there's a second book, because this stops with Scissor Sisters kind of in a perilous position. I kind of think, where are you going to go after that? However, maybe due to the personalities in the band, Jake may feel that that's a little bit unfair and a little bit too close to the bone. But either way, I do hope you enjoy Boys Keep Swinging, because I absolutely loved it. I have a weakness for music memoirs, but this is a thrilling one that has a lot of dazzling sparkle as well as a lot of heartfelt, revealing emotion. I really enjoyed it. Jake Shears' Boys Keep Swinging.